I really am so fucking tired of the shit coming out of like JD Vance's mouth. So he says, you think that maybe he was a bit sensitive about being run over because he was dragged a few months ago. Right? Well, conclusively then, why the fuck was he in the field in the first place? The only. The, see, I think that it must be the case that if he was deployed in the field, and we know this officer had PTSD, that whoever gave the order to send him to the scene that Renee Nicole Gold, or Good, sorry. I've been talking about this for days, so of course I'm gonna fuck up a little bit, So Renee Nicole Good, you know, was at, and that she was present at, why was he present at the scene? Why was an officer that is known to suffer from PTSD about this sort of thing even deployed to the field in a situation like this? It makes no sense. At the very least, if this officer was not let go on account of his PTSD, he should have been benched until getting clearance from a psychologist or psychiatrist. This is a qualified physician with all the proper academic degrees from a major university, not just some quack in a corner somewhere. I mean, like somebody that's actually a licensed clinician, by the APA, instead of putting him in the field, to shoot first and ask questions later. You know, I I just don't. I'm not buying it. I see, somebody's tire wheels are pointing to the right. I see a person, by all appearances, based on my discernment, is trying to flee the scene and get away from officers, and I can't help but think that the officers should have just moved out of the way. And the thing that really frustrates me is that I've seen so many people sputter at that suggestion, like, oh, you mean let the suspect get away? Yes, I do, actually. And I don't think that that is so unreasonable of a suggestion on the basis that, anybody who knows anything about law enforcement knows that as the vehicle starts to accelerate off, you can write down their license plate, or even, pull. He had his phone out. He could just instantly take a photo of it so that, he had more time to write it down, and then, enter those digits into his little computer, and then he'd have the address of the vehicle owner. And, God forbid, which is an extremely unlikely scenario, but, even in the edge case scenario where, somebody's car was being borrowed, and she doesn't live at the same address, well, you still have CCTV. I mean, there was no need for this, and I think a part of what shows how egregious this misconduct happened to be is that, there was another person's vehicle at the scene that was basically destroyed because of the fact that the officer shot the person, that was driving the SUV, and so it went careening into another vehicle, destroying it in the process. And that, to me, right there, that speaks to the fact that this officer is creating hazards on the scenes by engaging in the conduct he is as a result and as a consequence of his PTSD, regardless of whether or not Renee was, attempting to run over the other person or not, which, it doesn't appear from the video that I've seen that was the case. The tires initially, there is a, as she's backing up, she is turning to the left in order to turn the vehicle in that, direction and everything. But as she starts to pull forward, she turns the vehicle, the tires to the right, or she already starts doing it as she's pulling forward. And the officer comes out of nowhere and blows, his shots all over her as a person. Now, I believe this was cold-blooded murder. I'm with the crowd of people that believes this. I'm just probably pushing against what the tide of internet opinion is on this one, but that is my view, of things. But, the internet isn't reality. It isn't the real world. A lot of people, are out there, and not everybody is going to take the internet side on that one. I mean, I see people who think that no wrong was done here, but that's my 2 cents about it. That's how I feel about it. I feel this was cold-blooded murder, that Jonathan murdered Renee and everything. That's how I feel about it. But, to me, if JD Vance wants to come in and say this officer was suffering from PTSD, well, fine, but the conclusion from that is that he shouldn't have been present at the scene in the first place. I don't know what we're doing allowing officers with PTSD on the field, and it speaks to a gross incompetence at whoever gave the order to deploy the people that were sent or even allowed this officer onto the field. Was it JD Vance and Trump that allowed him onto the field? I don't know. I don't know who gave that order, but that order was a bunk order. It was a bad one. It was a bad call. Jonathan, the officer who made took the shot, should not have been on the field in this case at all. And in a sane world, on account of his PTSD, he would either be, desked or let go. I'm sorry, but that is a job that is just not um, that is a job that makes a condition that makes operating in this kind of professional environment that he is in no longer possible. If you did you know when our soldiers come back from war zones with PTSD, have you heard the stories about like military wives and everything who end up with husbands that have PTSD from combat and being exposed to it? I mean, they will wake up in the middle of the night and, often these women will get attacked brutally, beaten, because the person is just, they're seeing shit that isn't there. They're having the PTSD delusions, they're experiencing all of it. These women get battered, they end up victims from husbands that don't mean to do any of this, but it's like there's a split consciousness. And we know from statistics that not all military wives end up divorcing their husbands, but of the narrow sliver of them that come home with PTSD, divorce rates skyrocket because of it. So I can confidently tell you that if this officer had PTSD, he had no business being on the scene in the first place. And it speaks to a gross form of incompetence on the part of whoever gave that order in the first place. So, uh, whatever. That is, I call it as I see it, and I think that this speaks to the incompetence that is and rot at the top